Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Tānialan toku ingoa. I'm the Program Director of Te Kanapu Future Grid, and it's my pleasure to host you today. I'm joined by Andrew Sykes, Technical Director, Cameron McMahon, Grid Investment Modeler, and Mark Franklin, Principal Engineer. Welcome to our Te Kanapu Technical Webinar Series. Today's session provides an overview of the range of options we could consider in our technical analysis, along with indicative cost estimates. It's important to note up front that this is not a walkthrough of the first set of low regrets investments proposed in the grid blueprint. Rather, it's a broad look at possible options and costs. We also have more sessions coming up, including insights on data centres as one example, as well as our learning on the value of networks. So please keep an eye out for those. For today's format, please put questions in the chat and we'll address them at the end. If we don't get to everything, we'll follow up after the webinar. Please also sign up to our newsletter for updates and notifications for when we publish new material. Andrew, do you have anything that you'd like to add at this point?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Today's session is going to sort of build on, we had a session in November last year or late last year that looked at the sort of technical process methodology behind the blueprint as a whole. We had a deep dive into that earlier this year, particularly looking at that for power system modelling and market modelling that goes into determining what the grid blueprint is. The focus of today's webinar is looking at what are these transmission options are that are feeding into the methodology. What does that part of the process look like? So it's really kind of focused in on that. Could be an exciting session.
Thanks, Andrew. So now what I'm going to do is to take you through a quick overview of our timeline, what we have completed and what's coming up next. You can see there we've completed steps 1 to 4. Please keep an eye out for our summary of submissions on the finalised scenarios later this month. Next is our technical analysis to develop the draft grid blueprint, and that is targeted for later this year. But we will keep you updated on progress and how our work matures. So I'm happy to hand over now to Andrew and the team.
Thanks, Tanya. So when we think about transmission expansion, and the options around that, we find it useful to group the options into these 3 broad buckets. So together, they capture the full range of levers we have, but each bucket plays a very different role in how the system evolves. So bucket 1 there, category 1, is adding transmission capacity. This is really the primary focus of Te Kanapu. So these are the options that physically increase the amount of electricity the grid can move. So it's new lines, additional circuits, major reinforcements, new substations, or large interregional upgrades. So they're typically capital intensive, they take time to deliver, and they need strong confidence to justify, but they also provide the biggest step change in capability. So in a future where you've got material growth and demand, new generation patterns, and increased reliance on electricity, these options are what ultimately unlock the system. So Te Kanapu is about understanding where those step changes might be needed so we can make these informed low regrets decisions. Bucket 2, this category 2, is maximizing the existing transmission capacity. So this is what we do every day, right? This is the foundation of good transmission planning and good asset management. It includes upgrading conductors, improving protection schemes, operational changes, reconfigurations, things like that. It's essentially sweating the assets that we already have. So this approach does a really great job. It's efficient, it's disciplined, it's value focused, but by its nature, it's incremental. So it assumes that the future is kind of broadly going to look like the past and things will happen gradually. So if the system undergoes these material structural changes, rapid load growth, new industrial demand, things like that, there is a risk that relying on everything in this bucket would lead you to kind of underinvesting. Bucket 3 is things like consumer energy resources, flexibility, what you might call sort of virtual transmission lines, batteries, things like that. This includes demand response, storage, flexible load. These options are really powerful and they show up in every scenario that we look like. They reduce peaks in the demand forecast, they shift demand around, they help use the network more efficiently. But generally, they don't eliminate the need for transmission. They change how much is needed and where it's needed and what time it needs to turn up. So they're a sort of critical complement within the scenarios. So the key point, obviously, is that none of these buckets stand alone. So good system planning will use all three. And what Te Kanapu is adding here is a clear sort of scenario-based view on when this incremental optimization and flexibility are not going to be enough, and when it's time to seriously consider stepping into that bucket number one, category number one, and adding new transmission capacity to support the future system. So I'll hand over to Cam.
Thanks, Andrew. So one of the key questions we knew we'd have to be able to answer in this Te Kanapu work was, how much does it actually cost to expand the grid? At face value, this seems like a simple question, but Transpower hasn't built a new transmission line in over the decade. The last one was commissioned back in the early 2010s. So we didn't have a whole lot of recent data to fall back on. We knew that if we were going to be able to develop a credible grid blueprint, one that looks 25 years plus into the future, we needed to understand the key cost items, not just the rough number, but what's actually behind these costs. What are the big ticket items? And just as importantly, as you guys will know, we need transparency in this grid blueprint process. So we're sharing our assumptions, our methodology openly with you guys, with the sector. As a result of this, we need cost estimates that we can put in front of people and say, here's how we got to this number, and this is what's behind it. That transparency also helps us figure out which options are genuinely feasible. When you can see the cost breakdown, you can start to build up a picture of what's realistic when we're designing a grid blueprint. Next slide, please, Asher. To do that, we have built 5 cost estimation models that you can see up on the slides there. Each one covers a different type of grid investment. We've got the new transmission lines, which, to be honest, is mission critical for this Te Kanapu work. New transmission allows for big uplifts in network capacity. Alongside that, we've got line upgrades, which is where we take our existing assets and increase its capacity by either operating it at a higher temperature, reconductoring, or potentially even duplexing the transmission line. There's also a model we've got for underground and subsea cables, which is super important for our understanding of the cost of transmission through highly populated areas like Auckland or through the Cook Strait. Additionally, we've got a model for substations, which are the connection points in the network where lines come together and voltage gets transformed from our higher voltage transmission network to our distribution network. And finally, we've got a model for HVDC converter stations. This is the technology we use for things like the inter-island link between the North and South Islands. We need converter stations to convert the direct current into alternating current so that the rest of the network can deal with it. Between those 5 models, we can estimate the cost of pretty much any transmission options that we may be considering in the grid blueprint. So how do the models actually work? The costs are built from the bottom up. Rather than saying a transmission line costs X dollars per kilometre and leaving it at that, we've broken the cost down into its key components. For this, there are 4 main buckets. The first is our primary equipment. This is the physical stuff: towers, conductors, foundations, the things you actually see when you're driving past transmission equipment. The second is all the enabling works. This is the stuff that has to be done before any construction actually begins. It's the crane pads, the access tracks. The access tracks will enable, of course, trucks and cranes to be able to get to site. It's essentially all of the groundwork. The third is our design costs. These are things like engineers, our environmental specialists, cost estimators like Mark, the people who plan and design pretty much everything before the spade hits the ground. In the fourth bucket is property. Transmission lines will inevitably run across people's lands, so you need easements, which is the legal right to use the lands. Alongside easements, there's the cost of injurious effect. This is if we're not actually on someone's land, but our transmission line is potentially hindering the view, or something similar. By breaking it down into these four buckets, we can see where the money's going for each option, and we can adjust the inputs, things like voltage, structure type, terrain, and we can see how the cost of a certain transmission line might change with each of these things. There's a lot of levers to pull. This gives us a much richer picture than a single dollar per kilometre figure. Next slide, please, Asher. In trying to achieve a least regrets grid blueprint, we need to consider everything, which is why this initial options report may end up excluding some projects that come out in our final blueprint. As a bit of a flavour, we're looking into key regional upgrades where we may see significant load growth in the coming 25 years. This may include anywhere between Northland to Southland. However, we are also considering upgrades that look at the grid from a holistic perspective. This may be new intra-island HVDC links, new inter-island HVDC links, or increasing our grid backbone from 220 kV to 400 kV. I'll now hand over to Mark, who's going to take you through some indicative costs and our approach to escalation.
Yeah, thanks, Cam. So I'll just go through a bit more context on the model to explain these costs and the wide ranges, because that's always something of interest to people on the call, I think. But yeah, as Cam noted, we've built up the models using costs at a kind of assembly or a quantity level. These are predefined groupings. We maintain a library for our normal Transpower activities and projects outside of Te Kanapu, and so that allows us to link our day-to-day and our projects and costs back into the Te Kanapu model, which is a strength both from utilising our existing intellectual property of Transpower and also aligning any future estimating activities on this project with the models themselves. But this approach did mean that we would have to make some assumptions around the quantities used in those models, and this was done as a top-down approach from existing asset information and other project scopes. Yeah, I guess an example would be we haven't done specific design work for a new transmission line. Any individual transmission line, we've used models from our existing projects and assets, and that allows us to scope and estimate many projects without having a large design resource, which is perfect for this long-term planning work. But as you can see, there is a bit of a trade-off for having that speed and ease when you're estimating, and that's the accuracy. We have quite wide accuracy ranges. The model, as we've described, has uncertainty in both the quantity and cost rates used in it, and so we have to handle that somehow. Transpower uses estimate classification based on the AACE system, which is the Association of Advancement for Cost Engineering, and that assigns a class based on that level of project definition and provides some guidance on expected accuracy ranges. People familiar with project life cycles would say this is like the really front end, or in AACE terminology, it's a class 5 estimate, and that can have an accuracy range of -50 to 100% to plus 100%, and that's how we've sort of informed that from that model to give us a range of costs. Yeah, and some of those outputs are on the screen. It's worth noting that, yeah, while those accuracy ranges are applicable to an individual project, and it kind of makes it hard to make decisions on an individual project with those wide accuracy ranges, when you start to build up those projects in the program, you'd expect the project costs to be distributed throughout that range, and that would that creates a tendency towards the point of the range. So again, perfect for like a program level estimate. We're not saying like any of the NDPs would have that wider accuracy range by some statistical magic, you kind of pull the accuracy range in there. Yeah, so we've created a model. It's given us some costs, and then the next part of our estimation process was benchmarking, which is on the next slide, Asher. So as I said, we've got lots of data on some parts of the model or components of the model, and we've used that where possible. We turn that into gross unit rates, so at a per kilometre level, for example, for transmission lines. But we did identify that we had limited data, as Cam mentioned, not frequently building long new transmission lines. So we engaged Mott MacDonald through a competitive process to help fill in those gaps, and that allowed us access to their international benchmarks and their experience with similar planning exercises overseas. And they delivered us recommendations that improved the models and generally showed that our model approach was could be aligned with international benchmarks. And yeah, some of those benchmarks and activities are listed up there. You can see some of our Transpower's major projects on our internal review, some of the programs of work that Mott MacDonald did for us. And we could move to the next slide, going right for time. Yeah. Escalation was also an area that Transpower didn't have super long-term information readily available. So again, we worked with Mott MacDonald to come up with an approach for Te Kanapu. And so escalation in this context is the increase in project costs within an estimate over time. We have a model, Transpower has a model for short to medium term, but we're looking at much longer time horizons. So the model that Mott MacDonald proposed, and we obviously quite like, was this 3 horizon approach based on the technology, and that gave us the 3 horizons were mature, emerging, and transformational, and they each had a long run escalation factor to be used in the models. Probably everyone's aware of current kind of context. It's pretty hard to predict escalation, but this gives us a defendable approach that will allow us to compare all of our options and that time component and start to optimize and the cost benefit analysis and optimize timeframes and things like that. Yeah, so that's my bit.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, and actually that's a good reminder that part of the timing for this webinar is linked to the fact that I think we're in a place now where we can share those Mott MacDonald reports on our website. So look out for that in the coming days or weeks. We'll release those that quality assurance or review process that we went through with Mott MacDonald on our website. Cool. Well, to wrap it up, we just wanted to sort of frame it a little bit around how we're sort of thinking about the future, and particularly how we're thinking about the future technology. So when we publish our blueprint, once we've determined what that blueprint looks like, what you'll see on that is that what's been run through the cost benefit analysis, the options that we've looked at, will be built on these mature, established technologies. This is the reason why it's important to start there, is because these technologies have predictable costs, proven supply chains, and known lead times. So that gives us a robust, defensible foundation for saying what is likely to be needed within that grid blueprint. But still important is overlaying against that blueprint. If you know that you're looking at certain options, say new lines, new HVDC links in the 2030s or 2040s, what's the technology readiness level of some of these new technologies likely to be coming through? So phase shifting transformers, HTLS, multi-terminal HVDC, some of the sort of less common technologies that are, the emerging technologies, are they going to provide viable options to replace what we know today? So that's the sort of second step, where we overlay that blueprint with, let's say, sensitivities where we consider what would happen if technologies advance faster than expected, and whether or not those technologies could be used within the blueprint. So it helps us to identify where new developments could materially change outcomes in the blueprint, and highlights what are the key technologies that we need to keep monitoring over time as part of that blueprint. So yeah, so it's designed to be robust today and provide us with a solid foundation for what we need to get on with now, noting the very long lead times associated with building transmission, while also staying alert to technologies that could reshape things into the future.